Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind today's headlines. How you been doing, Dave?
Doing well. Another week in paradise. Tropical storm Hannah on its way. I don't know if that's going to allow me to not have to water the lawn for the next 3 or 4 days.
That'd be nice.
Pretty good. My water bill's been about $150 a month here, but I've got a lawn, which is great. But the water tends to evaporate before it hits the ground. So how about you? How are things back home in New York? Ready for the school year?
Not exactly, but we're working toward that, making some progress in that direction. Of course, every day is new information and new twists and turns and quarantine states and non-quarantine states and all the rest. So it's a time to be flexible in the world of higher education and I guess every other industry around. So yeah, but I'm excited to have baseball back. We'll be talking about that today. And that's, for me, that's like the soundtrack of my summer is baseball on the radio. So I'm looking forward to being able to get back to that and have a few distractions. I think that's in some ways kind of the overall point of our show today, to provide a little distraction. We've done 9 shows that centered on politics, throwing in a little culture and sports certainly along the way. But today we are going to focus on the return of sports. We got baseball back last night. We've got the NBA, NHL, NFL training camps starting up very soon. And so we're going to take a little break from the politics. It's good. It's healthy, right? We don't want politics to consume us. One of the problems of our day is that politics is everywhere. And of course, that includes sports, as we've certainly seen over these last weeks. But we're going to do our best to steer clear of that and talk about the games that we enjoy. Let's get right to it and look at some of the headlines. So we're going to kind of go sport by sport here. NBA, they are now in the bubble down there in Disney World area. And so far, it seems to be going well. There were no positive COVID-19 tests, the last round of tests. So the bubble concept seems to be working. We'll see how that goes as the season progresses. Certainly basketball, high contact intensity sport. And so there's obviously concerns about that. But interesting restart plan they've got, Dave. So 8 regular season games and a chance for some teams that are currently out of the playoffs to slide in. One team could do that in the East. There's 5 teams in the West that they invited. What do you make of all the plans for the NBA and their prospects for coming to a reasonably satisfactory conclusion to the season?
I thought of all the leagues, I was most perplexed by the NBA's plan, basically because when watching the NBA over the last 15 to 30 years, there are the best teams in basketball and they win. And usually is seeds 1, 2, and 3. You know what those seeds are. And you know, for example, for this year that the Bucks will be great, as will the Raptors and Celtics and Lakers and Clippers on the other side. But you can pick from one of about 8 teams as to who's going to make it to the finals and who's going to win. I'd be very, very surprised if any of the 6 seeds or lower, never mind the 8 teams trying to play in, get anywhere in this tournament. I probably won't focus too much until they get to the actual first round of the series.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's with the NBA, of course, it's a star-driven league. It's not even just a handful of best teams, but the very best players are the ones that win championships. So you do kind of wonder, with 22 teams in the bubble, whether that was necessary. You understand why, there would have been some close calls and stars that were left out. They wanted Zion Williamson there. And there are other reasons perhaps to have some of the other teams that were close get in, but is it just a matter of getting in so you can be crushed in the first round by the Lakers or Clippers or the Bucks or whomever?
At least you get to play golf in the bubble and do every other thing in the bubble, which seems to be like a pretty nice place to live in these times.
You could do worse, I think. Yeah, I've seen like the barber shop that they set up in there, and a lot of clips of golf. You can definitely see some of these guys are first forays out on the links. Others are very experienced golfers. Obviously, Steph Curry, scratch golfer, talking about organizing his own tournament. But there's others that I think are getting their first taste of the game. Great athletes, but makes for some funny golf swings sometimes. So there's a lot of good human interest stories coming out of this as well. Not so much of that with the NHL. So the NHL has decided rather than Orlando, they're going to center the experience in Edmonton and Toronto, which you wonder if the players are quite as excited about that option. I mean, Toronto, obviously a world-class city. Edmonton, maybe not on the top of everybody's list, but a safe place, certainly, for a restart. The big news was just yesterday. Now, the 32nd team in the NHL will be starting next year, the Seattle Kraken, named for a legendary Norwegian sea creature, which, with my Norwegian stock and Seattle connections, I'm pretty impressed. I think that's a good choice. I'm excited about the Kraken. Release the Kraken. That I could see this working. Obviously, there'll be natural rivals with the San Jose Sharks, right? So we got a Kraken Sharks thing going on there.
But
So
be honest, Matt. Did you know what a Kraken was before you looked it up, or is that something
I did look it up. It's really shameful because being of Norwegian heritage, I should know the stories of my people. But no, I didn't know what a Kraken was. I had to look that up. And there seems to be some dispute, actually, whether it's an octopus or it's more of a giant squid, exactly what it is, depending on which versions of the story you read. I kind of picture it a squid. That seems a little more intimidating, those kind of giant squids of, Melville-type legends and such. So Seattle Kraken may just do it. We may have a new allegiance in the Parks family.
Wow. Next, you'll be, listening to Pearl Jam, move out to Seattle, and be wearing, plaid shirts and all the rest. A whole different Matt Parks. But okay,
it's my heritage. Yeah, I know. I mean, my Norwegian forebears settled in Tacoma, Seattle, were fishermen. So I mean, this is
big stuff for you.
These are deep roots. Yeah,
big stuff.
So meanwhile, if you are a big NHL fan, they have set things up as they often do. I mean, their playoffs, they know how to put on a good show. So they've got 9 days, August 1st to August 9th, where it's basically all hockey all the time. There's 5 or 6 games each day, and you can pretty much watch 12 straight hours of hockey if you have the time and the interest. Top 4 seeds in each conference are playing a round-robin tournament. The next 8 teams are playing essentially a preliminary round of the playoffs. So there's 24 teams between Edmonton and Toronto working toward ultimately one Stanley Cup winner. It's always chaos in the NHL playoffs. There's always surprises and twists. And I think they've added more surprises and twists by throwing in those extra teams, the round-robin tournament. So, I think this may be the kind of thing that can give them a little bit more national play than perhaps they're otherwise used to. Certainly those 9 days of hockey heaven, if that's your thing, are coming soon.
That's the one thing with the NHL also. You see many 8 seeds beat 1 seeds and so on. Playoffs in the NHL are always filled with surprises, and which make it one of the best playoffs, if not the best playoff to watch. I'm a little bit worried over that 9-day period for some families that are hockey buffs. I think of the Blanders in New Jersey, your colleague, Josh Blander and his wife. What's going to happen to the kids? Are they going to get fed? Is the grass going to get cut, during those 9 days? But I mean, other than that, I love watching playoff hockey, and I think that's going to be a great tournament, and hopefully it will put the NHL more in the map.
Big year this year, first season for the Las Vegas Raiders, the much-traveled Raiders franchise, Oakland to LA to Oakland to now Las Vegas, maybe a permanent home. It feels like the kind of franchise that should have ended up in Las Vegas all along.
Perfect match. Yeah, even just looking at that stadium, where it's located, it's going to be a crazy place to play home games when they are allowed to have fans there. So, yeah, I think the Raiders fans are probably pretty happy, and you can drive there from anywhere along Oakland down to Southern California, where there are Raiders fans everywhere. So I think it'll be good for them.
The other big recent news was the mega deal for Pat Mahomes. Now, we all know with NFL contracts, you never really read the sticker price as the final amount the team is likely to pay, but the sticker price was $500 million for a quarterback that's certainly at the very top of the NFL right now. And if there's anybody you'd want to give $500 million to, it's Pat Mahomes. Speaking of quarterbacks, the other offseason big story, which we'll talk about more later, very near and dear to your heart, the move of Tom Brady to Tampa Bay, and now the Patriots replacing him with Cam Newton. So that will certainly be a storyline that all of the NFL will be following. The first time we get to find out, was it Brady, was it Belichick, or maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, NFL, out of all the leagues, the players seem to be most upset about wanting to return. I think that we won't have a preseason, if I'm understanding correctly the latest proposal. I don't know how that's going to work out in terms of injuries and all the rest. it really is one of those things. You mentioned how the NBA is a contact sport. The NFL is as well. You're sweating and breathing and, spitting, and you're right up in someone's face. And, I just don't know how you're going to get around if someone contacts it, someone else contacting it as well. What that means if you're out for 2 weeks, it'll make for an interesting dynamic. And I think with a lot of this, it's just a choice that the player has to make going into it, knowing there's a risk. If it happens, they may be out of commission for 2 weeks. Hopefully nothing more serious than that. But if you get to the point where you're at the point where you have 7 players, 10 players on the team that are sick, would the league at that point want to shut the whole thing down? I don't think that's a good thing, but from what I'm hearing from the players, that's maybe something that they'd want.
We're not going to do a full NFL preview this time around because obviously we're just at the beginning of training camps, but we are going to talk a bit more about baseball. So the first games last night, we predicted those last week, and we'll talk about how our predictions went. Not too bad. I think we did pretty well given the vagaries of baseball, and you never know exactly what you're going to get. But what I want to talk about a little bit are some of the big storylines for the season and recent seasons. One of the things that I think I'll be watching, and it may be not quite as clear how this will play out given the short season, is the way that the competitive balance in baseball has been shifting in the last few years. You remember back in 2011, 12, 13, the Astros tanked. They tanked on purpose, and they got some high draft picks. To their credit, they made great picks. And then a few years later, they won the World Series. And obviously, they've been competitive the last few years as well. We know about the cheating scandal, but sort of leaving that aside, the effort to get bad so they can get good worked. And that's not something you had previously really seen in baseball because, baseball draft is several years removed from actual success for most players on the field. And a lot of things happen. You're drafting an 18-year-old high school player. That player might need 3 or 4 years in the minor leagues, even a very good player, to be ready, and they won't all make it. So it's just not the same thing as tanking so that you can get what will be immediate all-star pro basketball player or NFL quarterback who seems to have all the tools to start day one. Baseball, the draft just doesn't work that way. And so it hasn't been a sport where you've really seen the tanking. But the last few years, this seems to be a new trend. Baltimore, the last 2 years, has lost more than 105 games. And it's becoming just a normal thing now for teams both to win 105 or more games, which has been very rare historically, and now to lose 105 or more games. The last couple of years, we've had a lot more teams doing that than in previous years. So I'm a little bit concerned, just speaking as a fan, about the overall competitive balance of baseball.
Yeah, it's funny. Even years ago, I always thought about those franchises that didn't have that much money and never seemed to perform that well. I mean, you had your exceptions, right? You had your Kansas City Royals that had their great years, and Blue Jays, et cetera. But yeah, I was often thought, well, what's the corrective for that? And part of what I thought of is I thought of what they do in England, right, with the Premier League and then the Championship League, so that if you want to be in the Premier League with the top teams, great. You have to earn your way after making it through the Championship League, and then you get bumped up, or you get relegated. And that type of relegation penalty for some of these franchises that are trying to tank it, maybe that would be a corrective. You'd certainly have to figure out something different in terms of who plays who in the regular season. But I don't think anyone would really mind watching some of the great star pitchers for the Yankees against the Nationals like we saw last night on a regular basis, because you had really 16 teams that had put together a great franchise and were ready to compete. So that'd be my, if it continues in this direction and kind of moving toward kind of, 2 leagues, one is the, real major leagues, the second kind of a minor major leagues. Yeah. Maybe something to think of.
I think relegation is not happening in American professional sports for a variety of reasons, but you do wonder, is it necessary to create the kind of, is it a draft lottery, right? Which reduces the incentive for tanking because your chances of getting that number 1 seed are reduced. There's other ways of addressing that, but it does seem to be a reasonable concern about the competitive balance here. And you'd hate to see teams like Baltimore, really a storied franchise, just intentionally not fielding an adequate major league roster. The other obviously big trend in baseball in recent years is you might say, the big data revolution, or the advanced analytics revolution. One of the things that's really changed dramatically over the last few years has been the emphasis on what are sometimes called the 3 true outcomes. So you've got home runs, walks, strikeouts. Why are these the 3 true outcomes? Because these are basically events that don't involve anybody but the batter, the pitcher, and the catcher, right? So you think about baseball as this interesting mix of the individual matchup between the batter and the pitcher, but then there's also the fielders behind the pitcher who are there to make plays. But obviously a walk or a strikeout doesn't require fielders, nor does a home run. And so there's been an emphasis, especially on the home run and the strikeout in recent years. And, if you grew up 80s or 90s, you certainly remember the late 90s, early 2000s, when the home run totals exploded, individual home run totals exploded. And now we know why, right? Because this was the era of steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs. But actually, the home runs that are being hit now, we have 1,000 more home runs last season than were hit at the height of the steroid era, right? So that's another 30, essentially 30 home runs per team. And yet the individual totals aren't as extreme. So this isn't about probably performance-enhancing drugs. We've got tests in place for that. When you see a trend where the whole bell curve shifts, right, that's different from where things are happening at the extreme. We recognize something weird was happening when Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were hitting 60 home runs every year, and no one had ever done that before. Now, people are getting 50 here and there, but a lot of people are getting 20. A lot of people are getting 30. A lot of people are getting 40. And the emphasis on a different kind of swing to try to increase the probability of home runs, a de-emphasis on avoiding strikeouts. So who cares if you strike out? Might as well take a swing and go for home runs, has created this dynamic. The strikeout also up massively, right? So strikeout pitchers, it used to be a big thing if you could strike out a batter an inning. Now the best pitchers are doing maybe a batter and a half an inning. Max Scherzer last night throws 5 1/3 innings, strikes out 11 guys. So that's 16 outs, 11 strikeouts, only 5 non-strikeout outs. So this is a trend that's been developing probably over the last 5-8 years. And I think there's a lot of people that are concerned that it sort of takes some of the fun, some of this other kinds of strategy out of baseball. What do you make of this kind of trajectory, Dave, as you watch baseball games and you kind of see this emphasis on the home run, the strikeout in particular, kind of take over the game?
Well, I think it says a lot about the technology that's now at a team's disposal to be able to take a look at, pitch angles, hitting angles, where balls fall. They're contacted. And I mean, every single aspect of a game is taped, by a team and run through digital programs and then produces, reports that can be used by teams. So I think it kind of shows you how technology in particular has affected a sport. And, you don't blame teams for wanting a winning advantage and seeing, in an opportunity, okay, hit a home run and we're going to have this percentage more runs over the course of a season rather than trying to, bunt out a single or hit to a certain area. Yeah, but I think the other side of that, right, the more technology there is, the more the players become robotic and the less that kind of natural talent, that natural swing, that natural flair that used to define the game is in play. So it's kind of art supplanting nature. There's still nature involved, of course, but art maybe supplementing nature to the degree where it undercuts the natural grace of the great ball player. So you'll still have, right, your great players. I just think that it'll be those individuals who in the past, may have been kind of a blip on the screen who are hitting 15 to 20 home runs a year because they've conditioned themselves to kind of become a manageable player. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's not going to keep the star from being a star, but just a course of technology applied to life.
Yeah, and of course, really the analytics revolution is everywhere in sports, and you can find that certainly in baseball, probably earliest in baseball. I was growing up in the 80s, and I was big in the statistical side of baseball and reading Bill James' historical baseball abstract and his annuals, and Elias Sports was putting out in the 80s, early 90s, annual analysis. In those days, they just didn't have big data. So they were really working hard to find the data that they needed to make responsible statistical judgments on things. And, there was a group of individuals back in the 80s that started up called Project Scoresheet, who basically recorded every single play of Major League Baseball games in a way that could be then fed into computers so that this data would be available to researchers, broadly speaking, because Major League Baseball wasn't releasing the data. And in those days, not every game was on TV. So you had to actually go to the game and score the game in a certain way. So, it's a totally different world, right? As you're saying, everything now is recorded and you can slice it and dice it easily. And the data has been democratized in terms of the access to it. But it was really a lot of creativity that went into some of that early statistical analysis that kind of began this analytics revolution and began to change strategy, began to reveal that the stolen base wasn't that valuable of a tool, even though it's exciting. I remember Rickey Henderson stealing all those bases in the 80s and early 90s, and it was him on base and wondering if he was going to go, and the way the catcher and the pitcher and the first baseman would interact on that was exciting. But it turns out not to be great strategically. If he gets caught 40 times and he steals 130 bases, which was his record-breaking season, the net runs he's gained for his team, just not that many. And you think about other strategies like the sacrifice bunt, maybe not quite as exciting, but there seemed to be a place for that. And yet further analysis, no, maybe not. So, there's this, I think what you're talking about, this nature versus art kind of tension here, where some of the things that I think you could say make the game of baseball beautiful and some of the drama that surrounds the game turn out to be things that aren't necessarily optimal strategies. And so we get this sort of massive shifting that's taking place, right? We're talking about the Rays this year might be playing with 2 outfielders and 5 infielders a lot of the time. And the reliever that comes in for one batter, and now we've got the opener who starts a couple of innings, and right. So these various changes that, again, are all about optimizing your chance to win. You don't, as you said, you don't blame any team for wanting to win. You do wonder, is there this tension with some of the things that make the game enjoyable, that make it pleasant to watch, and the strategies that are emerging from this data analytics?
Yeah, and like you said, it's happening in every sport. My favorite sport is the NFL, and my favorite coach, as you can imagine, as a Patriots fan, is Bill Belichick. And I mean, he at a very early time was thinking in these terms, just gazing at the game itself and seeing what victory meant. And he's quoted as saying 30 years ago that really the game, very simply from a defensive standpoint in the NFL, is you defend the middle of the field. You don't allow the offense to run or pass inside. Why do you do that? Because you don't want the offense to be able to move vertical. You want to force them to move horizontal. So that's a brilliant thought. It's just a person looking at a field and conceptually saying, how do I best give my team a chance to win? I play great defense. But what does that produce? It produces another kind of beautiful thought, and that was kind of the adjustments that were made by offenses in the 1980s and 1990s. You think of Bill Walsh and the 49ers and the West Coast offense, where you're attacking that middle of the field with quick timing pass plays. So it's kind of a counter to Belichick's idea. You get the defense on their heels, and then you have this back and forth, right, between Belichickian type defensive schemes and then the counter by the Bill Walshes of the world. And there's a great book that I'll mention later in my required reading, but talks about what made Bill Walsh and Bill Belichick, and kind of the strategist that doesn't take the grace out of the game, what makes them interesting. And Mike Lombardi, the author of the book, said, weirdly, Walsh's, the 49ers coach, offensive success and his unique perspective on the passing attack stemmed in part from his experience as a defensive coach. He'd always been a defensive coach. Belichick also uses defensive knowledge to design one of the most prolific offenses in modern football. Both men understood the checks and adjustments that occurred within defensive schemes. They built a counterattack by knowing their enemy. Most coaches today have been trained only on one side of the ball because they don't know both. They can't always effectively game plan against what the opposition is attempting. So there's a beauty to great coaching or generalship, so to speak, that plays into a lot of these sports. But I don't get I get the sense that a Belichick uses data, but he doesn't let data drive his thinking or his understanding of the game. He's going to employ it, but employ it in a way where, as a human being, he can convert it into something that leads to wins on the field. So it's a tough balance to strike, right?
I mean, the NFL always seems like it's sort of a classic copycat league. You get somebody that comes up with an innovative scheme on defense. Remember back the Bears back in the mid '80s, and then everybody starts to say, "Well, let's try that." And of course, Walsh and the West Coast offense. NFL, you can sort of see almost on a year-to-year basis, right? As a team has success, that the next year others will try to copy that. And of course, we've seen that with coaching trees as well, right? I mean, Belichick's coordinators are all over the place, or have been all over the place as head coaches, many of them not super successfully, but we've seen the same thing in the last few years coming out of Kansas City or Los Angeles as individual team success. Okay, therefore I want to put an offense out there like that one. And I want to bring in somebody who was working on that offense to implement it.
Right. And you just think on that, who's replied best to Belichick? Andy Reid. By what? Spreading the field, having these run pass option plays, and speed wins. So what's Belichick going to do this season? Well, the talk, he's going to go to a no position defense. So it's fun to watch. It kind of goes back to this real question of, is it the coach that makes the team great, or the players that make the team great? Of course, we talk about this in New England between Brady and Belichick, but you can talk about this in many industries. And a manager that makes the firm great, or the talent within the firm? Is it a teacher that has the greatest impact on the student, or the student's natural talent? Of course, it's a teacher we're talking
about. That one's easy.
That one's simple, right? Of course, it's us. But it's interesting, and it's interesting how technology is employed in this as well. But hopefully, the human aspect of sport will still be there. Certainly, watching sport last night, while it made me happy and my wife unhappy, definitely produced a better dynamic in our household.
So we're going to transition at this point to our required reading, and we're going to talk about some books that we find helpful and thoughtful in explaining the present sports scene. So, Professor Corbin, what are you going to lead off with today?
Well, I'm going to stick with football and reference one book that I think is a great read on coaching, and it's called Football, Gridiron, Genius, and it's written by Michael Lombardi, who's a former GM. And the book deals with how do you build teams and win at the highest level when you're trying to take into account a variety of different factors. You're dealing with a 22-year-old person that you don't know what their character is like. You may be able to test them and how fast they can run, how strong they are, and all the rest. But how can you get them to fit a scheme? How do you work with personalities and all the rest? So how have the best coaches in NFL history dealt with these issues? So that's my recommended, I call it recommended, not required reading for the week, given that this is more of a show on sports.
Yeah, well, I think you can still have required reading. So I'm gonna give you one required and one recommended then. So my required reading is Ted Williams' The Science of Hitting. And this actually began as a Sports Illustrated article. If you go on eBay, you can buy a copy of the Sports Illustrated issue where he talks about the science of hitting. But then it turned into a book, 1970, and then it was revised in 86. So the copy I grew up with was that 86 version, but you can still find, if you look in the right places, that early first edition. But, long before data revolution, long before the mathematicians took over baseball and the rest of sports, Ted Williams was really carefully reflecting on, I think it's fair to call it, the science of hitting. And here you have a guy who was at his best as good as anybody has ever been. And, you can have your debates about, the final Mount Rushmore of baseball hitters, but Ted Williams is somewhere in that group. And probably nobody in that group thought more about the craft and thought through how do you optimize your ability to perform well under those very challenging circumstances. So, it's rare for somebody who is a genius in one area to be able to explain that well, to write a good book about it. A lot of geniuses can do amazing things, but they can't explain it. They can't give you an account of how they did it. But this book, and it's, there's a co-author that helped him, but this is Ted Williams laying out what it was that made him great and the kind of thought process he went through. And people still read it today. I saw an article online where Chris Bryant said as he was growing up, he was reading this book. I remember Wade Boggs back in the 80s talked over and over again about how much benefit he got out of Ted Williams. And I think what's happened actually is that some of the things that Williams was onto, when he was a player in the 40s and 50s, have kind of come back. There was a period, Charlie Lau was a big hitting coach in the 80s, had a totally different theory. He wanted you to swing down on the ball. And I remember those weird swings in the 80s, all these guys kind of chopping at the ball, fast runners, infield singles. That's totally the opposite of where we are today. But a lot of the things that Ted Williams was talking about are just the kinds of things that the game has come back around to. So it's a short book, but it's one of those neat gifts that a genius has left to the rest of us.
It's funny when you mentioned you're going to do this on the show. I remember my neighbor, an older gentleman, gave me that book. It was a white book, and it had the 9 squares of the strike zone on the front of it.
Right.
Didn't really. I just didn't have a natural talent to make it the book work, but it was just an interesting. I remember even back then just kind of looking at it as an 8-year-old and like wondering, wow, this is pretty neat. So yeah, good for all the baseball players out there. Get that book. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no guarantees. It's not going to make you Ted Williams, but there is something about being able to explore a genius at his craft that's interesting.
Yeah. And you wonder, I think there are really bright athletes out there, right? Who have not only can perform, but can think about why they've performed well and how they've made their performance better. So you can imagine a Tom Brady writing a book called The Science of Quarterbacking that would likewise be as intelligent a read on what you're actually going through and what he's gone through for 20 years to make himself the best that he can be. And I think that type of, you said it was a gift. It's a gift for anyone to be able to do that, whether they're talking as Hamilton is in the science of politics or Ted Williams in the science of hitting. To pass that along to another, to be able to communicate that natural genius or ability is pretty neat.
Yeah. The other book I'm going to mention, which is, I guess, obvious in the context probably, is Moneyball, Michael Lewis, 2004. And, the book itself, the style is a little pompous. It's sort of everybody's an idiot except Billy Beane and Michael Lewis, basically, is the way that it's sort of written, the style. But if you want to understand where baseball is today and really where sports more broadly is today and how the emergence of big data and analytics and the opportunity to find value that had been previously hidden, that's really that story. And, the Brad Pitt movie's fine, but you got to read the book if you really want the story. All of this is part of a longer story of development of understanding of these games. And, that part of it I find fascinating and interesting. I think some of the danger of the over analytics approach to sport. There's a lot of writers today that think you're a complete idiot if you still care about whether pitchers win games, right? Because that's just a stupid statistic. What do you care about pitcher wins? And there's kind of a scientism almost that's sort of taken over sports writing in certain ways. You have the political sports writers. You've got the kind of science type sports writers that are too interested in kind of bludgeoning people with their superior statistical knowledge, or at least wanting to use numbers as if they have superior statistical knowledge. But there can still be artful stories. There can still be a way of incorporating this new information into games that make these games better, more enjoyable, and allow us to have deeper insights into what makes great athletes great. The thing that's drawn me to sports my whole life is a vision of human excellence, and to see people perform tasks that in some ways are completely random, right? Why that ball and that bat and these rules, all of that is arbitrary from a certain perspective. But there's something about the game coming together, and to see someone do it well. I will never forget the greatest sports moment of my life was watching Michael Johnson in the 96 Olympics run the 200 meters, break the world record by like 0.3 of a second. It was just unbelievable. Take your breath away performance. The guy's accelerating that last 100 meters as he takes the gold medal. And I'm not a huge track and field person. I don't care about it except every 4 years when the Olympics comes around. But there was something about that performance, right? Seeing a human being do something that nobody had ever done before in such a remarkable way, that's just powerful. And sports at its best is a reminder of that, of an achievement of excellence. And insofar as these new technologies and abilities to analyze allow us to see more of that, great. To the degree that they obscure that, then that's where I regret some of the developments of these last years.
So it's not the true, the good, the beautiful, and the statistic.
That's right. All right. Well, we're going to open the grade book now. And since we're doing all sports this show, we're going to look at a couple of the biggest off-season stories in the two sports that are getting ready to start. So first, which by the way just happened to coincidentally intersect with our favorite teams. So it's not our fault, but that's just how it worked out. So the first is the trade of Mookie Betts from the Red Sox to the Dodgers. And we've had, late breaking news on that because just the other day, Betts signed a 12-year extension for $365 million. So he will be a Dodger probably for the rest of his career. What do you make of that trade, Dave, now that you have kind of a foot in both camps here? A New Englander who's now living in L.A., who's at least thinking about rooting for the Dodgers. How would you grade the trade overall?
I think the trade definitely pushed me in the direction of rooting more for the Dodgers. I think the trade was an F for the Red Sox, and I think it was an A++ for the Dodgers. Betts, from what we know of him, has a great character. He works hard at his profession. He's humble, and he's excellent. He plays the game the way it's supposed to be played. So to have that person in your lineup along with Bellinger for the Dodgers just I think makes them great for the next 4 or 5 years if they can hold everything else together. And I don't see what the Red Sox got in return. I don't know many of the minor leaguers involved and whether, they're going to do anything of consequence for the Red Sox. But if you're in New England right now and a Boston fan, you're not looking forward to the next 2 months. So, and the Red Sox are everything. Red Sox Nation is everything to a lot of New England. So it's a kind of downer for a sure F in my grade book.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in New York like me and you're a Red Sox fan, you're not especially looking forward to. I mean, it's opening night, so I'm watching tonight for sure. But yeah, this is a tough trade. I mean, the only excuse for it is to say, well, Betts would not have signed for the Red Sox, but we have no evidence of that. Had the Red Sox given him the same contract the Dodgers did, why wouldn't he have signed with the Red Sox? Then all this talk about getting underneath the luxury tax threshold, the Red Sox are a very, very wealthy franchise, and I understand that you don't want to pay more to the common pool than you have to, but basically they got rid of Mookie Betts so they could get rid of David Price and David Price's contract, even though they're still paying half of David Price's contract. We got a guy who might be a third outfielder, and then a couple minor leaguers who, if things go well, they're kind of back of the roster kind of players. I mean, there's no one here that's going to be a great major league player. So the only thing you can say is, well, we're saving money, so you better get the next big thing when there's a big free agent coming down the pike. But of course, now this is the thing. A lot of teams are locking up their own players before they get onto the free agency market. So is Cody Bellinger going to be available when he's a free agent? Are there going to be other top-line players? Where do you go to replace Mookie Betts? That's the problem. There's no one to replace Mookie Betts. Mike Trout is signed. It's just, it's a blow, and of course the pitching on the Red Sox is horrible. They might score enough runs this year even without Betts, but their pitching is horrific. So it's going to look like a very difficult season for them. How about the other big story, the Patriots letting Tom Brady go, or Tom Brady choosing to walk, however you want to frame that, and then replacing him more recently with Cam Newton. What'd you make of all that, Dave?
Yeah, I'd give the part about letting Tom Brady go, I'd give it an A. I think that, and that's not a hit upon Tom Brady. Tom Brady was probably the most generous teammate that you could have over the last 15 years and made the Patriots salary cap situation work by taking contracts that were 10 to 12 million less than what he could have made on the open market. So that allowed you to get Mike Vrabel, another great player who, filled out a defense or an offensive line. I'm not sure about the Cam Newton. I don't see how they can lose unless there are personality conflicts in Foxborough. But there could be a great opportunity for Cam Newton, who's a wonderful football player, who's been injured, to be able to have a good year. I do think that the league is changing. I do think that I mentioned earlier this kind of run pass option that so defined offenses in the league, and if there's a way that the Patriots can make that work offensively and grind out some wins, as I'll mention later in the show, I think it's a win-win, and I'm also happy for Brady. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him in Tampa Bay, and whether he can use all of his skill set, his discipline, his leadership to help the Buccaneers do well. So I think a different situation than the Red Sox Mookie Betts.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's probably an opportunity on both sides of this. Tom Brady gets a chance to prove what he can do with another franchise. He's got Rob Gronkowski down there now with him, and an offense that seems to be designed to help him succeed at this stage of his career. And meanwhile, wouldn't it be great if Cam Newton could be healthy enough to really show us what he has shown in the past? I remember winning our fantasy football league on the back of Cam Newton some years ago. Great player and talent. And you could just see how Belichick could really do some neat things schematically to succeed with Newton if Newton's still got it. And that's the open question. But if he does, he's certainly going to be hungry. He's going to be eager to show that he has it. And so I think it could be a great opportunity for Newton and for the Patriots.
Yeah, and don't forget about Jarrett Stidham either. I mean, he's an unknown for those in our national audience won't know him at all. Texas high school football player, but they're very high on him. So if Newton doesn't work out, it's just another year of insurance until Stidham's ready to play big time. So yeah, I'm not worried about the Patriots because I really trust that Belichick knows what he's doing, and they've got their ducks in a row in Foxborough.
All right, so our last grade will be assigned for each other's first 4 fantasy baseball draft picks. So last Monday, we had our fantasy baseball draft, New Hampshire League that we've been a part of. I've taken a couple years off, just couldn't keep up with it. But with a 60-game season and no keepers this year, Dave, you sucked me back in. And so we were there back at it Monday night. It was a lot of fun because my son and I were doing this together. And, he's 11 now. So when I was more into fantasy baseball, he was pretty young and not able to really be as involved. But he was right there with me, and we were making the picks together. And I think, to be honest, I think we both did pretty well. We had the 7th and 8th picks out of 8. So those aren't great positions. I'd rather draft near the top of the draft, especially 8th position, which we had. You always have 2 picks in a row. So there's always the pressure. Well, okay, now if I don't take a catcher now, will there be any good catchers when it comes back around to me 15 picks later? But, with all that having been said, we were picking back to back. So I think we were kind of looking at the same players. Kind of fun to get back into this and have a chance to compete, at least in fantasy baseball. So we're going to grade each other's top 4 picks. And, read these off. You're going to see we kind of have different strategies. So that'll be part of the conversation here. Dave, first, you can grade my first 4 picks. I went Alex Bregman with the number 8 pick, Nolan Arenado at number 9. Then snake back around, it was Steven Strasburg at 24 and Chris Bryant at 25.
I like the first 2. I think that you got 2 really, top of the game hitters. Strasburg, I'm not convinced on. I always wonder about him year after year. He's a great pitcher, but he's not one of those top liners that I just have a lot of faith in. And Chris Bryant, you never know. There was a lot of hope that he was going to be, a Mike Trout-like player early on, and he hasn't really fulfilled that potential. So I'd give your first 2 picks A's and your second 2 picks B-, both of the B-. So B+, for your top 4.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take that. I thought about it the same way. In fact, your 3rd pick would have been my 3rd pick. You took Justin Verlander at 23. I was ready to grab him rather than Strasburg. He was kind of a tier above Strasburg as I looked at it. But you grabbed him, and good for you. So your other top 4 picks, Jacob deGrom, number 7 overall, Jack Flaherty, number 10, Verlander at 23, and then Freddie Freeman at number 26. Now, obviously, you were going for starting pitching first, and one of the big questions I think with a short season is what's the optimal strategy. For me, I was trying to avoid too much starting pitching too early, just because it seems like you only got 12 starts maybe, and with all the variability that's always embedded in pitchers season to season, I wanted to lead off with hitters at positions where they had some advantage over their competitors. So Bregman, Arenado, clearly I think the best at their respective positions. So I think you got 3 of the top 5 pitchers in baseball. And if you win all the pitching categories they could win for you, then you're in a great position in the league. I worry about one of those guys going down or just being a little bit off or whatever. So I wouldn't have done the pitcher first strategy. I chose not to do that. But having done that, I think you nailed it. Freddie Freeman is kind of like, I think, Chris Bryant for me. He's okay. He's good. He's had some good seasons. But there were other guys at first base that I probably would have taken before Freeman at that point in the draft. If he's your best hitter, then you have to worry in a relatively shallow league, is he going to be provide enough offense to keep that side of your team afloat? So I think, I'd probably give you the same grade. I think it's B+. As I looked at the teams after the draft, I thought our team plus one other were probably the best teams in the league. We'll see. It's always, on paper versus what happens. But I think there's a good chance we could be fighting it out for some top places here. So I'll look forward to that. And I'm sure this won't be the last we talk about here on the podcast.
Yeah, we can post the standings on the show notes so that our listening audience can figure out who's doing better. I'm the Canyon Lake Texans. You are the...
We are the Suffern Sluggers.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And by the way, we are in first place because we took Giancarlo Stanton, who, of course, led off his season last night with a 2-run home run. So for a moment, we had a perfect slugging average, a perfect on-base average, home run, RBIs, runs. So for one day at least, the Suffern Sluggers are at the top of the league.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It might be the last day. So I'll screenshot that, print it out, and enjoy it for the moment. All right. Well, we wrap up the show every week with the Tocqueville's Crystal Ball, and we always are picking something, predicting something, and seeing how we do against each other. Last week, the choices were focused on the results of last night's baseball games, and we actually did pretty well. You called a Nationals win over the Yankees, which obviously didn't happen, but then you said Dodgers 8, Giants 2, and it was actually 8-1. When we worked through all the numbers, it was really close, but on the double tiebreaker, we decided to give it to you because your pick for the Dodgers-Giants game was better than either of my picks for the other 2 games. Next week, you get to define the terms of the challenge, but this week, we're taking a break from our week-to-week predictions and making long-term predictions. We're going to make it quick. We're going to pick the champions of all 4 major sports leagues. So let's start with the NHL, Dave. We got 24 teams with a chance. Who do you think lifts Lord Stanley's Cup?
Tampa Bay Lightning.
Tampa Bay Lightning. Okay.
I think they're the team to beat.
Well, I'm going to be the homer on this. I'm going to say it's going to be the Boston Bruins. Although I'm going to predict, if I can make a secondary prediction, that the Dallas Stars will be their finals opponent. All right. How about the NBA? The restart coming soon. Who's going to be NBA champion?
I'm going to go with this is a tough one, but I'm going to go with the LA Clippers. I think the Clippers take it. I think Leonard is still in clutch, the player I'd want to have on my team. We'd said earlier that the NBA is all about big players playing at big moments, and I think that they can pull it together. Of course, Doc Rivers is their coach, former Celtics coach, and I think he's a great coach, and I think he'll be able to get them to the promised land, and they win. And they win a series over, here's my homer moment, over the Boston Celtics, who make it in the Eastern Conference. So it's Celtics, Clippers final, won by the Clippers.
Okay. I agree with you on the Clippers. I would pick them. I think it's going to could be a very interesting Western Conference final if it's the Clippers against the Lakers. I also would say watch out another Dallas team. The Dallas Mavericks have underperformed in terms of their record this year. They've been one of the best teams in terms of point differential. So watch out for them on the restart. They may just be able to do some things in the playoffs. I think it's going to be Bucks and Clippers ultimately have too much. Kawhi Leonard wins his second straight NBA championship. Now, the NFL. Still got a month before the season starts, so a lot of twists and turns that could still be ahead of us, but why not? Let's predict the Super Bowl champion 7 months before the Super Bowl happens.
The New England Patriots.
Got to be, right?
Every year. So I think that they win the AFC. It'll be an interesting year, right? I don't know if any team will win 13 or 14 games, given how things may play out with health and all the rest. But I think in a season of such uncertainty, you rely upon a person that can cover every one of his bases, which I think is Belichick. So I think whether it's getting ready for the season or in season, doing things that are a little bit different, trying to get that competitive advantage, I think he'll be able to do that. They may not have a great regular season, but I see them really surprising people, upsetting most of America, but surprising people. I would love to say that they play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Bowl. Could you imagine that as a Patriots hater to see Pat's Bucks in the Super Bowl? But I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be the Patriots versus the New Orleans Saints, and I think the Patriots are going to beat the Saints in the Super Bowl.
I don't think that's going to happen. I'd love it to happen, but I think this is Baltimore's year. They've kept the team together from last year. And so you're talking about continuity without training camp. 21 of 22 starters are back. They've got some young players like the Mark Andrews that are developing, Lamar Jackson. Jackson can't have the same year he had last year in all probability, but still there's enough talent on that team, both sides of the ball. I think they're just going to have too much. Whether they win 14 games again, that may not be, but I think they're going to be strong. I think Kansas City, they're yapping a lot. They're talking about 6 and 7 rings, and let's start with 2 guys. But I don't think they're going to get 2, not this year anyway. I think Baltimore, and I'm sticking with the Dallas connection. Baltimore over the Cowboys.
What's with the Dallas thing this week?
I don't know, but I was looking for teams that didn't do as well in terms of the record as the stats, the numbers seem to indicate they should have. Last year, the Cowboys outscored their opponents by over 100 points. They had third highest point differential in the NFC, and they were 8-8. That's unusual, right? You're losing a lot of close games. So I think the Cowboys, they got CeeDee Lamb. I think that offense is going to be really tough, and they've got enough on defense. They've got some new starters on defense too. So I hate to say it, but I think the Cowboys are going to go to the NFC Championship, take out either the Saints or the 49ers, and then lose to Baltimore in the Super Bowl. Last but not least, we have Major League Baseball. Breaking news, 16-team playoff. So there's a slight chance the Red Sox could make the playoffs. Now with over half the league, there may very well be some teams in the playoffs with sub-500 records, so that also could be in the Red Sox favor. What do you make of this baseball season? How's it going to end come October, Dave?
Well, we know the Astros cheated, and many of the players, I don't know how many are still on the team, and that's a great scandal. But there are a lot of great, talented players on that team as well. And I think the Astros take the American League. I think I used this strategy during the draft. I think starting pitching is essential to having a good year this year. So I'm going to go with the Astros in the AL and the Nationals in the NL, and Astros win. Astros take the title this year in the Major League Baseball.
So the rematch goes the other way. All right. Well, I'm going to maybe stay a little closer to expectations here. I think it's going to be the Dodgers in the National League, and I think they will ultimately win the World Series. But I think it'll be the Rays in the American League. I really think with this new 16-team playoff, you're going to have some good team lose in the first round. It's best 2 out of 3. So if you've got a team that's a 7 or 8 seed that has 2 good starting pitchers, that could be enough to knock out a 1 or 2 seed. So I would not be surprised if the Yankees, who have Garrett Cole, but number 2, James Paxton, number 3, Tanaka, Those are guys that could be a little shaky. What happens if they go up against Cleveland and they've got to face Clevenger and Bieber? They may not get to game 3. So I'm expecting something weird to happen, especially without any real home field advantage. You get to play all 3 games at your home park, but no fans, so no real home field advantage. I think it could be real interesting. I'm expecting upsets, but the Dodgers just have it top to bottom, so I don't think they can be beaten. But the Rays have those 3 starting pitchers. They get them through that first series, and then off they go. So I think the Rays make it to the World Series, but the Dodgers finally get over the hump and win their first World Series title since Orel Hershiser took them to glory back in 1988. All right, well, that's it for us this week. We've had a great time talking about sports. We will be back on the politics scene next time, but no doubt checking in with these sports as the seasons progress, and we certainly hope that they will progress to their planned conclusions. Thanks for being with us. As always, we encourage you to check out the podcast and subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google and Stitcher. Really grateful for your support, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.